Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Avatar video. This is going to be my full review, in-depth analysis, breakdown for Netflix Avatar The Last Airbender Episode 1, N101 Aang. So, it's taken a while to get here, but it also should be acknowledged that we're not even a week after the launch of the show. A week will be tomorrow. We're still early on in this show coming out, so it'll take a while to obviously do in-depth breakdowns of all of the episodes, but we have to start here with episode 1. So to present my general thoughts, overall I would say the first episode I think is one of the better episodes. I consider my top 3 episodes of the 8 to be the kind of higher quality episodes, the one I consider to be the best. I think the other 5 I have are more in the mixed category, but I think there's a clear distinction between my top 3, which is basically episode 1, episode 2, and episode 6 I think are the 3 best ones, and then there's issues I think more heavily with the other ones. There are still some issues with this episode, obviously, as we'll get into, just because of the way they approach doing some of this stuff, some of the character arcs, some of the decisions that are made. But mostly, I think this episode is incredibly solid. It's a very good start for live-action Avatar here, and I don't have that many major complaints with this one, because I think broadly it's basically forced to be quite accurate to the source material, and I don't think it makes any like super bad egregious errors apart from maybe one, and a lot of the issues I do feel are more things that maybe come in episodes after this one. Like the setup here is fine, it's just what you do with some of that setup I think is more where the issues come in. So let's get into going through the episode, mostly kind of scene by scene. I'll skip over stuff when I really feel there's not too much to say, but we obviously start off with this very interesting 20-minute long Sozin's Comet flashback sequence. We knew this was coming, maybe not the full scope of it until very close to release, but yeah, like a third of the episode is this backstory stuff. It takes us until like the 21st minute to get to the present day and see Katara on screen basically. So interesting stuff. Now obviously this is new. We know relatively little about the exact details of the Air Nomad genocide and what exactly happened surrounding Sozin's Comet in the original. The big change that we basically have here is effectively the logistics surrounding the Fire Nation attacking the air temples is changed compared to what we know it to be in the original. In the original, it seems like under the Comet, the Fire Nation launches a continuous attack against all of the nations. So there's a full distraction across the world. This is why every nation is occupied by the Fire Nation. No one can defend any other nations. And in the middle of all of this, they are able to take out the airbenders. But there's probably still some details that are important that we don't know about in the original source material. So it'll be interesting as we go through this to see their attempt at it. So interestingly, we open up with an Earthbender spy in the Fire Nation who has this message. He has this confirmation that the Fire Nation are going to start a war by attacking the Earth Kingdom. So he fights his heart out, gets the message out, but is eventually captured. He has this amazing last stand here, defending the messenger, getting away with the message, but he is brought before the Fire Lord and killed. So really interesting stuff. We do start right in the middle of the action. We don't really know what built up to this, of like what exactly the spy was doing, how exactly he got the message, but he's being pursued here with this important document. So great opening sequence. I think it demonstrates the bending really well. I think this is the actor David Sakurai. Really dynamic, I think, in the action scene here. Definitely the best earthbender we see in all of season 1. I think he comes across as being just a little bit more fluid even than Boomy, even though Boomy I think is meant to be more powerful, sort of like canonically. I think it looks better here. And it's just a really intense scene because you know that like he's putting it all on the line to take out these firebenders coming after him, and they're trying to take him out, but then it was always just a ruse. And you know, if he was actually getting away with secret documents they didn't want to get out, he probably wouldn't have even got that far. But it's an interesting scene overall, and a good first opening action scene. Then we get the Sozin scene. So obviously Sozin ends up killing him. Very brutal, grabbing his hand, setting him alight. But it's what he says to him beforehand and then after he kills him that's important here. That, you know, all you've done is helped my plans basically come to fruition. You have delivered the message to the Earth King that I'm going to attack the Earth Kingdom. That's not really the case. That's a distraction. Everyone will rally around the Earth Kingdom and they'll be distracted from what I'm really trying to do, which is targeting the air nomads, because the new avatar is an air nomad and that's what I'm after. I'm going to kill them all. And that's our big major opening sequence of like the Fire Nation want to get rid of the threat of a new young avatar, and so they're going to destroy an entire nation of nomads to do that. And you get across how skilled and kind of tricky Sozin is with this kind of cleverly constructed plan. And this brings us into our kind of main sequence of the backstory. I do want to quickly talk about the intro here, because it's only on this first episode here. We get the kind of fire, earth, air, water bit. It's interesting, but it's also got this weird, like, visual style that's kind of feels like a mix of CG live action. Is there just like a filter over it? Not really sure what to make of it. It looks kind of cool, but it's a bit weird looking overall. Kyoshi is actually the avatar to give us our explanation of this, not Roku, who would make maybe a bit more sense overall. She introduces the concept of the avatar, including a very cool sequence here with the kind of endless steps highlighting the past lives of the avatar. The one bit that I think makes it look a little weird is just that it isn't Roku. So Kyoshi takes her place and then there is an avatar before her, and then she is the one to talk about the next avatar, the young air nomad avatar Aang, to kind of introduce him into the series. It's a weird choice to a certain degree. I get it because she's technically a much more popular character overall, especially among the hardcore fans who have read the Kyoshi novels. Because technically, we know more now about Kyoshi and Yang Chen than we do about Roku. Even though Roku got some focus in ATLA itself. But, you know, there's a difference between like one main backstory episode and then like two entire novels for both of these avatars. The problem is, we're not talking about the novels entirely here. We're talking about ATLA, so why isn't it Roku? That's what ends up kind of just feeling a little bit odd, because Roku is ultimately very important. That it's a significant detail that he was the avatar when the war basically got started. Like, him and what happened with Sozin is what caused the war to kind of start. And we don't really focus on that. And it's weird because there are other times in the series where they bring information from later seasons forward with abandon, almost badly. And then here potentially is a way to bring maybe valid information forward a little bit, give us some more context on the war and what Avatar was going on when this attack initially came in, earlier on, of course. Like, how did we end up in a situation where, like, the Fire Nation is planning to attack and there's a very young avatar in place? What happened to the previous avatar? There's questions that you have about that they don't actually touch on, and they leave that for later, but then other things they don't. It's not that big of an issue to me. I sort of understand highlighting Kyoshi, but I don't think Roku got the focus that he needed, is the main thing I'd say. Then we get into the main crux of the backstory here, the build-up to the actual attack. Plus also, of course, Aang's the Storm flashback is effectively included here to set up his arc. So all of this is actually, I think, reasonably well done. There's some weirdness around the initial airbending scene because Aang's borderline gliding, flying around the place, but he doesn't have his glider. I just don't think they were maybe as consistent with the portrayal of airbending in this scene as they were in other scenes. I just think it's a little bit too floaty. You could have done something very similar to this, but I think you needed to use different moves. I'll highlight another scene later on that makes it clearer. The problem is, some of these scenes felt like they needed to include him using his glider, but they didn't. So he's moving a little bit too much while he's in like mid-air, that it makes it come across as like, wow, he's like borderline using almost like Avatar state level like control of air currents to move like that in the air. But it definitely gets across that like he's a master, he's fun loving because he does a whole show off sequence. Gyatso I think is really well portrayed in these moments. Maybe they could have shown a little bit more of the kind of fun-loving aspects of Gyatso, like the whole scene where they throw out the fruit pies at the other elders, but they're tonally making it a little bit more serious, and later on we do get some elements of that fun with Gyatso in like the episode 5 flashback when we get to it. The line that he says here about like, maybe there'll be a time where you wish you had spent more time with your teachers. I do feel it's a bit on the nose. It's a bit blunt. It's way too obviously telling the audience that like, I'm gonna die soon type thing. I think that just could have been worded slightly better. I get it. Technically, Gyatso knows that the Fire Nation is doing something. They're starting something, and that might affect the Airbenders, and things might become very dark. So it's not like completely silly that he says this, but it's still a bit much in my mind. I do like this explanation about like why the air nomads are all grouped up. It's because of the Great Comet Festival, and this is why everyone's coming to the Southern Air Temple, and why just showing an attack on one temple is a way to show effectively the whole nation being wiped out. Maybe still there's a bit of a logistics issue of just like really every single person, so like the other temples are just empty. And obviously they don't really go into details about like, is there a system for hunting down other air nomads, like referencing like the Relics comic like is present in the original, to kind of account for the fact that of course not every air nomad would be killed on that one day basically the comet is active. They have to have a system for hunting down the remainder, the survivors basically. But anyway, this then basically builds up to, of course, the the Gyatso sequence of like he defends Aang, the other elders want Aang to go about progress as the Avatar, because it's effectively the idea of Aang needs to live a normal childhood versus the Avatar being needed now, and that we unfortunately have to put the responsibility of the Avatar ahead of the care for a child basically. I do like that, Gyatso nearly gets through to everyone, but they ultimately realize that because of the information from earlier on, the air nomads have received it as well. Something is happening. The Avatar needs to be involved in the world sooner rather than later. Like, he's going to be needed. So they make the choice to kind of focus on the logical one rather than the kind of emotional choice. But it's nice. It gets across, Gyatso, how much he cares for Aang, trying to defend him and his childhood and stuff like that. Seeing all the elders there is actually a pretty kind of cool scene. But it's there in the original more or less as well. It's just there's more going on in a way in this one. So then Gyatso has to actually tell Aang that he is the Avatar. I like that they do it in Yang Chen's shrine, because the shrines become sort of an important thing as the series goes on. I like that we actually, here's the one for Yang Chen, which gets destroyed here, which is why when Aang comes back to it, of course, there's no connection necessarily that happens because it's broken. So that makes a lot of sense, but this is where he gets the reveal. Yeah, you've always been special, it even established that, like, Aang actually got his arrow tattoos in this room rather than where most people get them, kind of highlighting that they've always had little things kind of connecting him back to the Avatar all the time. And this is where we get into this arc of Aang as the reluctant Avatar, his struggles with responsibility. The elders had already talked about that the role of the Avatar requires such a heavy responsibility, and that's a lot to place on a child. And that's exactly what happens with this arc. They maybe, over the course of the season, push it a bit too hard. It's a bit overdone from certain characters just really going in on Aang over accept your responsibility, accept your responsibility. But as we'll see, it is a bit undercut by the fact that Aang never abandons his responsibility. It's just a case of he's struggling with it. He if he could choose, wouldn't want it. But it's weird that in this version of the show, they don't have him actually run away from it. It's just like a mistake. And because they hit it harder with more characters that it's a problem that Aang did this, it's so weird that they don't actually commit to the fact that he actually did it. So just a bit of a weird one overall with that. And I do like it because, like, you can tell Yasuo's trying to help him through this. He knows it's such a struggle of, like, I believe in you, you can do this. The fact that you don't seek out the power and in a way are not super excited about it means you are all the more suited to be the Avatar because you respect that kind of in a way more than anyone. But he does have so many doubts. That brings up the line of Aang saying, like, I guess we can stop pretending to be friends. But Yasuo's like, no, you are my friend. You'll always be my friend. So it's a nice moment between the two. I felt it worked quite well. Did Gyatso maybe explain a little bit too much about, like, oh, here's the last order of the avatars, like, oh, Yang-Chen, you know, Karuk, Kyoshi, Roku. Maybe a little bit like, okay, I get it. But I don't mind, like, highlighting quite early on that, like, hey, these are the names of the avatars who will be the most significant on Aang's journey. Just remember that this is the order. I don't mind that too badly. I know a lot of people say that there's quite a lot of exposition in these episodes. I don't really feel myself that that's what's the problem with the episode. Maybe from a perfect structure, you know, does the episode flow perfectly perspective, it maybe explains a little bit too much. But I think the issues are more just like certain adaptation changes that don't help certain scenes within the episode overall. This brings us to the Appa scene, effectively the runaway scene, where this is where we do get Aang kind of venting to Appa about how he feels away from Gyatso. He really kind of lays it all on the line. Like, he's scared of the responsibility, the power that he now has, and especially of being alone. And so it's after this he makes the decision to actually fly away on Appa. But it's not to run away, it's to just clear his head. He just says, like, things are kind of easier up here, and it's just like, we'll go in a quick flight and come back. It's definitely made abundantly clear he is not running away. Unlike the original where he leaves like a letter behind to say he's running away, nothing like that happens. It's just he happens to, after getting this massive reveal, fly away for a little bit just to think about things with his bison, and this happens to be when the Sozon's Comet attack comes in. It's a weird decision. I think they absolutely should have made a different choice, and I don't think there's been many people really defending this one, of just like, it's such a weird thing to be here, given how hard you hit this arc. The fact that Aang doesn't actually run away is crazy to me. But yeah, then we get the action scene itself. I like it overall. The only thing I would say that's a negative with the action here is that I do think a lot of the normal firebenders are not shown to obviously be super enhanced by the comet. They still seem to just use relatively basic attacks. And I'm just kind of like, is that just the way they're showing it? That it's these standard attacks, but they just have more energy behind them, so even basic moves getting hit by them is now lethal instead of just like you get a burn. Is that kind of the sort of thing that they're going for here? Because there's a few little bits and pieces, like they can do the fire flying. When they land, there's a bit of like an explosion when they land, which is kind of cool. But otherwise, Sozon is the only character who really gets to showcase that, like, he's particularly enhanced by the comet doing like notable things. Like, I think you see like one other firebender do a move that's kind of like a stream of fire that comes across quite powerfully. Otherwise, not so much. So the airbenders get a decent showing here, but you know, you can tell it's so against the odds. I like the storytelling of like the elders trying to protect the kids and try and get them to safety. Sister Liu here with the tornado guarding the bridge. Gyatso bringing the kids across into the Yang-Chen shrine to protect them there. A lot of the air nomads like protecting the entrances into like the living quarters and stuff like that, and that's where a lot of them go down. just highlighting like a real defense aspect, that that's what their focus is as primarily peaceful monks, but they show themselves quite well in battle. Which brings us to the Gyatso scene. I think everyone wishes they had maybe just shown Gyatso doing a little bit more, just to really highlight this is the best airbender in the world, show us him in action a bit. Instead, it's just he defends, he does this big powerful gust, but Sozin just kind of walks through it. Just a stream of fire, and then eventually Gyatso's defenses kind of fail. And Gyatso dies at the exact same moment as Aang goes into the iceberg, basically setting up the situation we have in the present day. It's fine, ultimately. I just wish Gyatso was given a little bit more chance to shine, showing off some more impressive moves. Otherwise, my only slight issue would be that in relation to 105, episode 5 of the season, when we reveal that Gyatso somehow managed to stop himself from fully passing on after he died, so he's able to like stay back to talk to Aang once in the spirit world. I just wish they had explained that a little bit, whether it be in the fight with Sozin, he just focuses on defending and does some sort of a spiritual thing to set himself up for that. I wish there was a bit of setup there, but there really isn't. So it's just a bit hand-wavy about what exactly happens to set up the Gyatso stuff in episode 5. Just a little bit of like, did you fully think it all through? That isn't maybe so great. But then we get into the present day stuff. This is where we'll be able to kind of skim through things a little bit quicker here. I like the moment here of like the ship is closer to the village, and this is where Katara practices her water bending because it's mostly sealed off from the outside world. But there's also a kind of cool symbolism of the fact that the last southern waterbender is training in the ship that brought so much like devastation, the ship that brought the people that killed so many southern waterbenders. There's an interesting connections there that I kind of like. Yeah, they basically just head back to the village, then they head out to go fishing, setting up the initial kind of opening scene of the original on the boat. The main thing I want to talk about in this scene on the boat is just that they do kind of argue back and forth about some stuff, about like Sokka's very protective of Katara. They emphasize that this version of Sokka is more aware of the history of the tribe, what happened with the firebenders and the waterbending. Whereas in the original, of course, Sokka's just dismissive of bending because he's like skeptical, doesn't really like it or get it. It's not so much because like it's a danger for Katara to do it out in the open, and I think there's ways to value either one. Obviously the counterpoint to I think the way they do it here is obviously that it's been so long, in a way, since the raids. Do you really think there's random Fire Nation scouts just like over there if she was to randomly do some water bending? But I get him being cautious given that they really emphasize Hakoda giving him the responsibility to protect everyone. The one line I'd maybe be critical of is just he says that like, but maybe you should focus more on like spending time helping in the village. And it's I guess meant to just get across that, what are they saying, that this version of Katara doesn't do a lot to help in the village? Or is this Sokka just being like, don't waterbend ever, put that time into helping the village? It's just a little bit like, what are we doing here? Their argument here comes back to the idea of, Sokka wants to prepare the village to fight, versus Katara arguing that, the tribe has a great tradition in waterbending and that should be emphasized too. But the second Hakoda gets brought up, Sokka's like, Dad's not here, I am. And it gets into this arc that the siblings kind of have of Sokka sort of shuts Katara down at certain times. And so Katara is a little more meek in this version than the more kind of passionate, like almost like fiery emotions that can sort of come out of her sometimes. They took away a little bit of the kind of sass that I think Katara has in the original, where like in the original, I don't think Katara would have accepted at all Sokka saying this to her, but this version just kind of stops talking and just kind of goes on with it. And I don't think that's the right path to take with Katara as a character. I do think in general across the entire series, Katara is underplayed, and it feels like quite a few of her kind of key scenes are taken out and not really replaced with that much else, which I think is a little bit kind of frustrating as we go on. So this then builds onto the whole boy in the iceberg scene, which I think is mostly really well done. They cut back and forth between at the ice, Zuko on his ship with his notebook, which becomes an interesting enough plot point. We'll talk about it more kind of later on. I think it makes sense that like he has done a certain amount of research on these 3 years. He's found clues and information about avatars, but never the current avatar until now when his statues start to glow. My criticism of this sequence is definitely that it is not made clear at all in my mind what actually cracks open the ice. I think they're trying to tell us that Katara trying to pull the canoe back, she's straining. The strain goes into the ice and it cracks it open, but I don't think visually or at all it's portrayed that well at all. In contrast to the original, where this is Katara giving out to Sokka for being like sexist and all of this other stuff, how much responsibility she has in the village, she just lets it all out, hands flailing all over the place, powerful water bending happening here because she's letting her emotions flow and come out completely here, and this is what cracks open the ice. That makes to me a lot more sense than Katara just slightly straining here, especially because we've not had the scene yet where Aang teaches Katara about like letting your energy flow to make the waterbending advancement that she needs to. Jet, something similar happening in episode 3, I believe. It's just like, huh? Okay, are we sure? Or are we really emphasizing the idea of like, here's Katara's raw potential here, but again, I don't think it was visually showcased in the most ideal way. That's my general thoughts on this. The hope, I like the hope on Zuko, where you can tell it's really, really huge for him to see this light, and I think it comes across really well in the performance. So that brings, you know, Sokka and Katara bring him back to the tribe, yes. Then we get Zuko and Iroh talking about basically Zuko's hope and, you know, the reality of the banishment and stuff like that. This is good because it's like Iroh's first scene, and I like that it gets across the idea that Iroh is worried that Zuko has put so much hope in on this. What if it's not the case? That will destroy you. He's kind of trying to also lead him down the path of being a bit more realistic about this, of like, your banishment. I know he said you could come back if you captured the Avatar, but do you really think, given what happened, that he actually means that? Are you sure this isn't like a fool's errand, that you've just been sent away and he doesn't want you back? But he knows that that would destroy Zuko if he said that so plainly. And so it's this idea of like, Zuko thinks his destiny is to do this, but Iroh kind of knows it lies elsewhere, and it's a really good scene, I think, overall. Then we have Aang waking up, and there's some fun stuff here. You see he immediately wants to rush out and play with the kids from the water tribe. Sokka is super protective once again. Then we get this moment as Katara and Gran come out of like Aang seemingly flying through the air, but I think in this case it's pretty clear, especially if you see the video, he's on a little tornado of air. And that makes sense because of the way he's moving versus the previous scene where he's falling out of the sky and is able to just like zip over here and stuff like that, almost as if he's flying. It just brings up maybe the idea of, should they have maybe just made the decision with airbending to just, with the VFX, show it a little clearer and not rely on the rest of the environment to show it off and be hyper realistic about it? But anyway, it's a relatively minor point overall. We also get like Appa arriving at that moment as well. This scene, I think, is actually pretty well done. I think it's actually a clever way to have them all figure out the whole, hey Aang, you're 100 years removed from time. Just them kind of acknowledging, here's what we know of history. Do you know any of it? And Aang's like, no. And that being the confirmation for everyone that, oh, then this means you are removed from time. This is how they figure out that somehow he's been in that ice for 100 years, versus the way they do in the original. Still works, but you know, I actually like how this is overall done. Some people, I think, have major problems with Gran basically reading out the intro to ATLA originally. I think it's okay. I don't hate it. I don't love it, but I think it works in terms of like her basically pointing out everyone in the tribe knows this legend. Pretty much anyone from any other nation knows this legend to a certain degree, but you don't. You mentioned the Great Comet Festival. The last one was 100 years ago. You don't even know that the Southern Temples were attacked. I think it's a nice way to reveal some of that to him, because the truth comes out, and the information as it's presented, it can't really be denied in the way it's presented to him. So he goes into the Southern Air Temple kind of knowing what the truth is. So I think that's reasonably well done. The scene with Zuko and his crew, I like that it just gets across Zuko's desperation. He thinks he's kind of inspiring them to get ready for the fight, but I think they only see the desperation of like him ending it with, and we'll die for this mission if we have to, is just a step too far. This scene, then getting into Katara, because again, I think the portrayal of Katara is interesting to talk about, because I don't think the actress does anything particularly wrong. I think it's just the script, it's the direction. They just make a decision to not have Katara have as heavy emotion in certain scenes. That they always limit her to here, whereas in the original, Katara at certain moments went up to here. There's moments where I think it comes close, but I think they pull back too much, and especially with the way they do some of the rest of her arc, I think it just leaves her feeling a little bit like lacking in some of the key elements of her character, to the point where I think the big thing with live action Katara is I almost can't imagine this character giving the speech to the Earthbenders in 106 if they were to do that episode. They obviously skipped over it here, but I couldn't really imagine this version quite doing that. I think there's a scene later on where I'll highlight that maybe here this gets close, but it's just one of those things where like, I hope they bring a more confident Katara into book 2. And maybe it's part of this arc is that they wanted her to get the confidence, and now that she's quote unquote a master by the end of the season, she'll be in a better place going forward. Hopefully that's how they do it. This scene is interesting though, because like it's obviously her connecting to Aang. I know how you feel. I've lost people too. My father's away at war, lost my mother. There's a little Kaya flashback in here as well. They talk about Sokka, how much responsibility he was given, and just that they've all had to grow up fast. And this is a connection point between Sokka, Katara, and also Aang. Aang, now accepting his role as the Avatar, is absolutely going through this as well. So that's pretty good. And then I like that she gives this to him, just like, what is the current status of the war? Waterbenders and Earth Kingdom still fighting hard, but the nations are for the most part very separate these days. They keep to themselves, and that's probably one of the main impacts of the war. Lots of people have died, but relations between all nations have been badly affected, like the South isolated from the North, and various other examples as well. I think it's a pretty nice scene getting that stuff across. Quick scene, Zuko fighting on the ship. I like the Kyoshi reference. Again, similar to the previous scene, I like Iroh trying to just make Zuko see a little bit of sense without just destroying his hope. This scene also, again, a lot of these Katara Aang scenes are pretty nice. It's just like, I wish we just had a little bit more classic Katara in here. But yeah, this is where the mention of like she's the last Southern Waterbender, she has no trainer, comes up. Interesting line here. I'm a warrior. I should be able to do more for our people. My one concern with this line is just I feel they lean into this too hard, and this becomes her entire arc in the season. Instead of like anything else, she kind of becomes a little bit too much the I want to fight character, versus her focus being more on I want to like fulfill my potential as a bender and do what I can to, you know, help kind of going forward. I feel with Katara kind of calling herself a warrior is a bit of a kind of interesting angle to take, even if I get what they're trying to go for. But I do like Aang as a master, just giving her the basics, the crash course she has never ever had. The stuff that anyone in any official bending training would get. Controlling your energy, controlling your chi. He just gives her the basics on that, and that helps her to make a big breakthrough overall. And so this scene, I think, works pretty nicely overall. Then we get the setup for the battle kind of scene as the tribe is preparing for Zuko to arrive. Gran at this point reveals Aang's the Avatar, kind of connecting the dots of, oh, the only reason the Fire Nation will be here is because the Last Airbender is the Avatar. Sokka actually calls Aang a coward for running away when he hears this information. When the world needed him most, he ran. And again, given that Aang didn't actually run away, it's just a kind of accident of circumstances, it's like, why? This isn't in the original. But then Aang actually running away was in the original. Why are they not, like, you know, lined up for this version? I just don't really quite understand it. And then he also, like, dismisses Katara when she asks to be involved. He's just like, you go hide. And Katara, like, wants to say something but feels like she can't speak up to Sokka. And I get it, they build up to, like, the scene coming up, like, next. But it's like, that's not Katara. Katara wouldn't act like that. But anyway, we do get to this scene. Zuko arrives at the village, asks them to hand over their outsider, basically, or they'll burn the village down. Sokka's immediately planning to do this, but then we get the argument. Finally, it feels like, yes, this is more like actual Katara. She speaks her mind, she acknowledges that, okay, like, yeah, Hakoda, our father, gave you this responsibility to protect the tribe. But what about what Mom said? That to protect those who cannot protect themselves. Aang has lost everything. He needs someone to fight for him. She does say she knows how hard the responsibility has been on him, but there is more to being a leader than just what he does, and that includes that the people need something to live for. The Avatar is hope, has brought hope, and that's something that they need just as much as anything. And it's like, there we go, that's a Katara speech. That one actually kind of works. Would I have liked it to be a little bit more intense, bit more emotional? Yes, but I think it was as close as anything to original Katara, and so it's definitely a good scene from the actor here. It then creates, I think, a bit of a good moment for Sokka. Like, I thought it was pretty powerful. He walks into the hut, grabs the club, he's going to fight for Aang. He exits the village. He puts on a decent show against Zuko in terms of standing up for himself. He correctly, I think, analyzes the situation and gets to the heart of it in terms of like, leader to leader, let's fight. But I also like for Zuko that it's sort of like he accepts the more honorable fight between leaders, kind of like an Agni Kai style thing. Whereas his men are kind of like, why would you do that? That he still has that kind of honorable edge to him, which I do like. And this is obviously when Aang reveals himself, with the main change being this scene here as Aang leaves, like, Katara, you don't need to fight for me right now. Sokka, you're the bravest person I've ever met for doing that for me. Nice little scene just with kind of wise Aang fully connecting with everything that's kind of going on around him overall. Then we get this moment here where Sokka basically passes on leadership to the next oldest boy in the tribe because he's going after Aang. Again, this is maybe a scene where I do think they maybe emphasize Sokka over Katara a little bit. Whereas in the original, I felt like Katara was more of a focus here. Sokka still got the moment of just like, are you going to argue with me or are you going to come with me? But I just felt like, again, Katara didn't quite get the chance to speak and the focus was just too much on Sokka. That brings us then into this interesting scene, a new scene. Iroh talking to Aang in the kind of prison on the ship. And it's interesting because it gets really in depth on like Iroh's perspective on things, and that the whole takeaway from this is very clearly that what he says to Aang is sort of what he believed in the past. It's probably his logic for why he laid siege to Ba Sing Se for 600 days. But then Aang, again, the wisdom of the character coming out, and I like that they kept this in, that he's aware of what's going on. He has this subtle wisdom even though he's quite young. He asks, is that what you believe? What you just said? And he doesn't answer. He immediately leaves at this point and doesn't answer because he's in this weird spot where like, what do I believe at this point? Like with the Avatar back and Zuko after him, what do I kind of do in this situation? How should the war end in a way? It's I like the depth that they have here, and that is something that they continue with over the episodes. Iroh and a lot of the Zuko stuff, I think, is consistently pretty well done across the episodes, and that does need to be noted. Then we get this. So yeah, this is pretty much the end sequence here of the episode. You know, Aang makes his escape. They don't do the Avatar state scene. I think it's fine. That was one of the weaker applications of the Avatar state. Choosing to build up to a bigger moment, I think, is fine. Especially because you're going to have the Gyatso kind of related Avatar state scene in just a moment. Right choice in my mind. The problem I would have here is the Katara defending from the fireball from Zuko moment. To me, she brings up water from way too far away for her level, to the point where I'm like, that's borderline like an Avatar state style move. Like bringing water from that high up, given that like Kyoshi doing what she does in the Kyoshi novels, like bringing like earth from the sea floor is basically considered to be a like Avatar state level earthbending move. The logistics of this I just felt were all wrong. Just have Aang send the fireball back like in the original. Don't overcomplicate it here. Especially because it seems to relate to this arc with Katara where they really want to hyper, double, triple down on just how quickly she develops at waterbending. Which was always present in the original, but they tried to like emphasize it even more over the episodes, and I just don't think it quite works in the way it needs to. I like them realizing that, okay, we can't go home, so Aang, where should we go next? We go to the Southern Air Temple. I don't quite like that they kind of do this weird thing where, like, we never saw a scene of them, like, saying goodbye to Gran and, like, packing their bags and stuff like that. But then we come back to it at the start of the next episode and, like, oh, Gran did know they were going and like gave them this stuff on their trip. But then it's this weird plot point that like Sokka was like, oh no, I thought we were just going on one trip and then we'd come back. And it's like, what? I just think they slightly overcomplicated it with their logistics here and made it weird across the end of this episode into the start of the next episode. Yeah, the Southern Air Temple is just done very quickly. They hit the main scene from the episode on the Aang side of the episode pretty well, but it is lightning quick. We arrive here, see it's destroyed, Fire Nation helmet, Aang walks inside the Yangchen shrine, finds Gyatso's body, we do the Avatar state scene, he comes down out of the Avatar state, Katara hug, and then final speech to end the episode. I get it. You didn't want to do the whole sequence of like Katara holding the truth back from him. And I think that was the right move because you'd already told Aang with the Gran scene earlier on that it for sure is true. There's no need to hide it from Aang. If you had more time, I think you probably could have done it in the original way and have it work. It's just that like we really don't get much time to linger on this like at all. But the main thing we need to talk about here is that it is Gyatso's words that make him exit the Avatar state. Not a speech from Katara and Sokka about how they're his family now, just Gyatso's words about, like, this, like, I believe in you. You are the one, the right one for this responsibility. You'll always be my friend. And I get what they were thinking. This is where Aang goes into the Avatar state because of the death of Gyatso, what happened here. He exits the Avatar state because he knows in his head Gyatso wouldn't want him to be in this much pain over this. And Gyatso wants him to be the best Avatar he can be. And he can only do that if he controls himself. I get their logic. To me, you needed to have both. If you were going to emphasize Gyatso, you also needed to have more of a Katara and Sokka focus here. Of like, you've lost your people from the past. You can remember Gyatso's words, but you also have new friends. Emphasize it something along those lines. Maybe you don't want to full on say like the original does, we're your family now. But say you now have new friends. There are new people you can meet. There's hope because you're back and you're here in this era. That sort of an idea. I just don't like that they completely removed the connection of like him to his new friends, basically. It was just a bit of a weird one, ultimately. But we just end on the note of, like, it's basically Aang gives his speech about, I'm going to do what the monks wanted me to do, accept my role as the Avatar, and I'm going to do that to the best of my ability. Like, I wasn't there for them then, I'll do my best in this era to do it going forward. So reasonable speech to end the episode. Quick cut to Zuko highlighting he has his goal as well. After 3 years, he's on the scent of the Avatar, and he has hope again. And Aang has hope. He's accepting his role as the Avatar. Katara has hope because of her speech to Sokka. Sokka kind of has hope as well. So overall, mostly a really good opener to live-action Avatar. Some subtleties and some nuances throughout the episode, certainly, that maybe are not, like, perfect. But, you know, I think the flashback stuff, you know, did its job quite well. Doing the storm reasonably well. You know, the argument of, like, did we need to do it? And, like, is it fine that the original chose to keep it this rather kind of mysterious event that, in a way, not talking about it much, but knowing that it happened has just as much impact as showing it. For the age rating that the original show had versus what this had, I can see why they did it, because I do think as hardcore fans, some of us just want to know some of the details about what happened overall, and that whole idea. So I think it was perfectly fine doing it that way. The decision to have Aang not run away remains baffling to me. And then my only other real criticisms, I think, as you go through the episode is just, I think, the portrayal of Katara just to me feels a little bit off. Like, they just chose to take away some of her intensity in terms of emotions as a character, and almost like give some of her scenes to Sokka. And then his arc maybe isn't as perfect as I'd want it to be, but I think his is more in line with what I would expect than I think Katara's. So I'm interested to follow these arcs as we go through these more in-depth reviews going forward. But definitely a good opening episode. I don't have the level of issues I have with other episodes with this one, as you can see as we went through it there. So in the comments, let me know what your thoughts were on this episode. But yes, that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.